Let's bring in Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey. He's the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which just held a hearing a few hours ago on the situation in Syria. Senator, good to see you. Thanks for coming in. We appreciate it. This is obviously a good sign, if true, that 21 out of 23 Syrian chemical weapons facilities have been destroyed or rendered inoperable. But how can we be sure that that's it, that these are the only facilities?
Well, that's exactly a question I asked of the State Department today, because public reports indicated that we believe that there were 45 sites or so in Syria. So while this is certainly much welcome that the 21 sites which and the machinery to produce chemical weapons have been destroyed, we need access to all of the sites, as well as ultimately a conclusion as how do we get rid of the chemicals that exist and how do they get destroyed. So good news to some extent, but still a lot more work to be done in access to all of the sites that we ourselves, through our intelligence, determine exist and for which we need access to.
And what about the chemical weapons themselves, the stockpiles? How concerned are you that we're going to, that the watchdog will actually be able to monitor all of those?
Well, this is going to depend upon access, and this is the next stage of what we want this organization to do and the world needs to follow through on through the Security Council. And it is my hope that they'll have access to that. But at the same time that we're riveted on chemical weapons, which of course is a great national security interest of the United States, I must be honest with you, Jake, today's hearing left me bewildered about that this government does not have a strategy as to Syria. It seems that we're having meetings about how we get to meetings in Geneva while, you know, Syria is becoming the Somalia of the Middle East and attracting an all-star cast of violent extremists. And it's beyond my imagination that at this stage we don't have a comprehensive plan to try to get Syria into a different track when we have all of the consequences to the region, to our allies, and to our own national security because of Syria ultimately becoming a breeding ground for terrorists.
Have you conveyed that? I mean, those are very strong words from you, Senator, especially as an Obama supporter and Democrat. Have you conveyed that directly to Dr. Rice, the National Security Advisor, or Secretary of State John Kerry, in terms of your concern that there really isn't any sort of coherent strategy?
Well, I was waiting for this hearing to see whether I would hear anything that would indicate to me. We had Ambassador Ford, who's a tremendous public servant, but whose testimony, along with the Assistant Secretary of State in charge of the chemical weapons element and our AID administrator in terms of humanitarian issues, for which there's some great work being done in that regard. But the reality is I heard no comprehensive, cohesive strategy. And so I will, shortly after I leave your program, going to be meeting with Secretary Kerry on Iran. I intend to also pursue him on Syria because this is not acceptable. The committee acted in a way that gave the administration back in May the wherewithal to try to help the vetted opposition in Syria, and also gave them the power that I think got us to this more successful point on chemical weapons by the authorization of a military force at the time, which was critical to being able to negotiate with the Russians to move forward on the chemical weapons. But that doesn't stop the underlying massacre that is taking place, the consequences to the entire region. Let's
turn to another place where there are horrific massacres going on, Iraq. President Obama is meeting with Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, where he's expected al-Maliki to ask for military aid in combating al-Qaeda-driven violence in Iraq. You were one of the senators, a bipartisan group, who sent a letter to President Obama this week. You wrote, quote, "We encourage you to step up our counterterrorism support for Iraq. It is in our national security interest to enhance the effectiveness of Iraq's security forces, especially through greater intelligence sharing." Have you heard back from the White House since you and your fellow senators sent that letter?
We have not. But I did get an opportunity to meet with Prime Minister Maliki, and I will say that letter also spoke to the necessity for the Prime Minister to take bolder political steps within Iraq to have less of an authoritarian and sectarian government and a more inclusive government with Shia and Kurds in power sharing and in resources. And weapons alone, or even the sharing of intelligence, is not going to solve some of the fundamental fundamental challenges that we believe that in that bipartisan group is creating part of the attraction by al-Qaeda acceptance in elements of Iraq, because ultimately, if you find yourself in the Shia or Kurd community and you feel that you're not part of this new national government and participation, then you ultimately feel not only marginalized but open to the susceptibility of the arguments that al-Qaeda will make to you. So yes, we want to help the Iraqis have the intelligence and the resources to fight al-Qaeda, but we need them to help themselves in a political process that creates a more open and inclusive Iraq if we're going to ultimately meet this challenge.
And finally, Senator, some of your Republican colleagues, such as Senators Graham and McCain, they're threatening to hold up Obama administration nominations, such as Janet Yellen, the nominee to be Fed chair, until they are able to get more information on Benghazi, hear specifically directly from survivors. Why not let survivors testify?
Well, look, Benghazi has had the most exhaustive set of documents, hearings. In our own committee, we held several hearings on Benghazi, both in a classified setting, so every question could be asked without the concern of certain intelligence information getting out. In a public setting, we had it with former Secretary Clinton. We've had questions raised with Secretary Kerry. You know, at some point, it becomes a question of, do you want to hold on to the issue or do you want to get to the truth? The truth is, I think what has been shared with the committee, both publicly and privately and in other forums, and I'm not sure what continues to be the goal of some of our colleagues in this regard.
I covered that story a lot when it broke, and I was a White House correspondent, and one of the things that struck me was there were many, many officials on the ground in Libya, diplomatic officials, security officials, who wanted more security in Libya, and the State Department ignored them, ignored their requests. And I've never understood why that was, and I haven't seen any real accountability for those who denied those requests. I know that there are a lot of conspiracy theories about Benghazi that are ludicrous, but that is a very real problem, what happened there in terms of the security request being denied. Why do you think they were denied security?
Well, it would take a long time to go through all the elements, but I will say this, that there was clearly some informational process in terms of upwards information that did not work well. I think there was some look at the intelligence in a way that didn't look at it in terms of specifics towards an imminent threat, that maybe should have looked at the entire environment in Libya to make the analysis for what was or not a threat. That has created changes at the State Department where there is a clear line not only of authority, but a person for high-risk, high-threat posts that directly has a lot of power going directly to the Undersecretary of State. The Undersecretary of State, Wendy Sherman, is intimately involved in this process. That's one step away from the Secretary. So the experiences of Benghazi have ultimately created a new order that will, I hope, both in terms of the analysis of intelligence, looking at intelligence in a different way, and having a clear line of communication that can be used expeditiously, will ultimately meet our challenges in a challenging global environment where terrorism is a constant threat. One of the things we need to do is to pass the embassy security bill that has elements of this that pass through the committee on a bipartisan basis. We need to get that passed in the Senate as well.
All right, Senator Bob Menendez, Democrat of New Jersey. You just got a new colleague today, Senator Cory Booker, sworn in. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.